Pixar doesn't make movies by magic. They make them by failing, over and over again. You know, draft after draft, reel after reel, they continuously iterate until the story finally clicks. Michael Arndt breaks down this process in his video essay on the screenwriting process of Toy Story 3, and he really shares the secret for how you can tell stories like Pixar. And the answer is simple. It's really iteration. Pixar's standard operating procedure for writing stories is essentially this. First, they write the script. They get their basic story into place, then they create their reels. This is their rough drawings of what the scene could look like, and then with this, once it's completed for the film, they watch it. You know, it's screened mostly with an audience of creatives they respect. It's what they call their brain trust. Then they debrief. You know, they break down what works and what doesn't with their brain trust, then they repeat. You know, they start back from the beginning and keep rewriting and refilming, re-editing, rewriting, refilming, re-editing until the movie truly works. Really, they're kind of getting to make the movie before they make the movie. So that's pretty much it, you know, video over. But, you know, I hear you saying, like, what? I understand this theory, but how can I actually use this to tell my stories and make them better? Well, let's look at an example of one of my films that I've just released called Baggage. You know, this short really started with me looking at my closet and just being really freaked out by the idea of if the door handle really just started to kind of shake and started to kind of freak me out. And then this morphed into the idea that became my previous film, My Bad. The idea at that point would be that we would start with a door rattling, then see a man cleaning up a messy apartment, you know, overturned furniture, things just really disarray. Then we see our second character sitting next to the door looking pretty terrified, holding a knife. At that point, the door would stop shaking, the cleaning man would walk over, grab the knife from the other man, they would stare at each other, and then the door would start shaking again. Honestly, it's kind of muddy. You know, I couldn't figure out what it was about, and thus I couldn't really figure out how it should end. So I kind of scrapped it, but I kept the core idea of two people cleaning up their mess, and that really morphed into My Bad, which I'll put a link in the description in case you want to go see that film. But that was really the first step in this iterative process. I didn't actually film this version of it, but I was able to see it ahead of time through the storyboards I was able to create. And, you know, kind of like Pixar, I was able to see the movie before I actually made the movie, before I released the movie, to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Through this process, I found that the movie I actually wanted to make, that ended up becoming Baggage, really worked best as a relationship drama. You know, someone who didn't want to acknowledge and really accept that their relationship had ended, and that led them to just procrastinating the end of their relationship. Next, I want to kind of show how Pixar's iterative process really shaped two major parts of this film. First, let's start with the opening. When I originally wrote this and storyboarded it, it basically followed this simple pattern. This man was packing up his ex's belongings, and we would only see this through his ex's name written on one of the boxes, but through B-roll and establishing shots, we'd also see his closet door perfectly still. Then while the character's packing up a box, we hear some creepy monster-adjacent sound off screen. You know, the character would flick their eyes upwards, and we'd see the closet from their POV. You know, as we hold on the door, suddenly it shakes and the handle rattles. We'd see a close-up reaction shot of the character looking to the closet. That would then push us into our second act. So at this point, I've completed writing, shooting, and editing. And the only thing left now following the Pixar process is watching with our brain trust and completing the cycle all over again. And the first thing we really notice is that something just kind of felt off with this movie. We kind of realized we didn't properly set up the stakes and the connection between the character, his ex, and the door. The door kind of felt really disconnected to the relationship drama because I wanted it to really be clear that there is something in there that he needs to get for his ex, and something in there is stopping him from going and opening that door. So it felt just a little disconnected and kind of like a cheap jump scare rather than have an actual connective tissue to our character's emotional arc. So we went back to the drawing board, I went back to the writing phase, to the storyboarding phase, to really try to clear this up and make this a lot more impactful. Eventually, the opening turned into this. The character would be packing up his ex's stuff, just the same as before, But now, this time they also get a text saying that they'll be there at 7 to pick up their stuff. This added that extra motivation that the character needed to look up at the closet, kind of hinting that there is something in there that they still need to pack up. And only after they ask their ex to reconsider does the closet door start to open up by itself. This new opening is pretty much the same length, but this time it really makes the setup a whole lot clearer, and each shot is a lot more intentional with the story that we're trying to tell. I mean, think about your last project. Were you able to really set up clear and obvious stakes within the first 30 seconds of the film? All right, let's take a look at the ending now. Originally, after the character tried to call their ex and get them to come back and pack up their own stuff, they tried to distract themselves by watching TV. But I had it kind of where the closet door was rattling like crazy the whole time. They try to turn up the volume then to drown out the door, then silence. The door stops, and we only hear the audio stop at first, but the character looks at it and we linger. This leads them to turning the TV down and walking over to the door. Once they're close by, the door handle will begin to shake more viciously than ever. So, same process. After editing, I went to my brain trust, we watched the movie, we took some notes, and things weren't really clicking. The character was a lot more passive than we wanted him to be, and kind of like the opening, we were shying a little bit away from more of that relationship kind of context that I really wanted us to focus on. The TV bit was a bit unconnected to the relationship drama, the ex was kind of not really thought about or mentioned again after that point, and the character only moved to go to the door once the door itself had kind of sparked to life. So after rewriting, refilming, and re-editing, I had this new version of the ending, where after that same phone call where they tried to get the ex to come pack up their own stuff, we open on the character drinking tea. They look at their closet to remind us of the stakes, and then they get a text. Their ex lets them know that they'll be there in 20 and to please be ready. This motivates them to look at the boxes and back at the door. Now, instead of a random TV side quest, we've set the stakes back into the relationship drama and made our character a more active participant to answering the question of will they accept that their relationship is over or not. By using this Pixar principle, I was able to really strip away a lot of unnecessary bits of the story and really hone in on what it is I was trying to say through getting to experiment with what didn't work. Too much of the time, I feel like everything that I shoot needs to be incorporated into the movie. I made this great shot, it needs to be included. This was my original idea, this was my vision, that's where I need to go. And so going back to that brain trust and being open and willing to listen to what your creative partners, what your brain trust has to say, it really, really makes for much more impactful work when you were able to follow this kind of iterative process. I don't want it to come across as my film is some sort of like genius level movie. Honestly, it's fine. There's nothing inherently special about it. It's not Pixar quality, but I was able to really hone in on the stakes and what I wanted to say by following this iterative process and by including a brain trust to watch the film and then go back all the way to the beginning to rewrite, reshoot, and re-edit, and feeling okay with throwing out large swaths of the movie. Honestly, the biggest takeaway from this is that you can throw away any amount of the movie you want. And it's okay to start shooting before you have all the ideas, before you have every question answered. You can shoot, you can edit, you can reshoot, you can re-edit, you can do this process over and over until you have the most refined version of your movie. The standard live action model for this is reshoots. That happens all the time on big and small budget productions. But what I'm kind of saying is that you can really rethink the whole model itself and really throw 100% of it away if it's not working in order to really refine what you're trying to say to make that as clear and impactful as possible. Now, who is your brain trust? Who is your trusted creative collaborators? Do you have any? If not, you can go find some, and it doesn't have to be filmmakers. Anyone that you think has a discernible eye, anyone that you think is really, really gifted with clear communication, or you think has a very distinct point of view. It doesn't even have to be about anything, even art related. Go chat with them, have them watch what you've made, and then make some tweaks based on their feedback. At the end of the day, you might only have one thing that changes that, but that might be the game changer for people being a little bit confused to really, really understanding and connecting with what you're going for. Honestly, it's pretty simple. Write, shoot, edit, watch, debrief, rewrite, reshoot, re-edit, and on and on and on. Honestly, it's not going to make the process any easier. In fact, it's probably going to make it harder and more stressful and take longer, but it probably will make the end result even stronger. See ya.